Hello and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar on developing operational resilience. My name's Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor at A-Team Group and I'll moderate today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are Fleur Elston, Vice President EMEA Resilience at State Street, Johan Rosen, Head of Risk at Swedbank, Scott Bridgen, GRC Consulting Director at OneTrust, and Kavitha Venkita, Partner, Head of Cybersecurity and Risk at ACA Group. I'll ask our speakers to introduce themselves in just a few minutes, but first, just a little bit of information for you about the webinar. To the right of your video square, or whatever it is, you'll see two panels. One is for polls and one is for questions. We'll be running 3 audience polls during this webinar, so I'll let you know when they're coming up. Please do vote. It's great to hear your views on things. In the other one, please put your questions for our experts. We'll take them throughout the webinar rather than leaving them to the end, because otherwise we often run out of time and we can't answer your questions. So please put them up there and we'll answer as many as we can as we go along. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll also see some other A-Team Group resources. You can register for our next RegTech Summit virtual in June. You can download our Regulatory Data Handbook, which is a difficult to read but very well read book, or you can download a white paper related to this webinar on financial markets operations response to COVID-19, best practices for working from home. So that's absolutely enough of me, and let me come to our speakers. Fleur, would you like to start and introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, hi everyone, I'm Fleur Elston. Currently I'm Vice President EMEA Resiliency for State Street, and I come at this topic with about 15 years specialising in business resilience and business continuity, including crisis management. So there's some synchronicity in the disciplines. And my definition for operational resilience is the ability for a firm to withstand, respond to, and recover from operational disruptions to services that they contract to provide consumers or other businesses.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Johan, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm currently head of risk, responsible for risk control functions for all the group-wide sort of group functions for enterprise-wide digital banking developments, IT, and also including a lot of the sort of central staff functions that govern resilience type matters. And I've been in banking for the past 20 years, and the last part of that I've spent in developing second-line capabilities for assuring on cybersecurity and different other resilience topics. My definition of resiliency is very, very equal to what Fleur just said. And I'd like to stress that I include in that the definition of the different components that are technology risks and change management and also the cybersecurity issues. So there's a what I found is sometimes missed is this variety of components that are included in what resilience really is about.
Okay, that's lovely. Scott, coming to you.
Absolutely. So I'm Scott Bridgen. My actual title is Global Head of Global Offering Manager, but they give me the title Consulting because no one knows what an offering manager is. And I come from the ivory tower of Vendorland. So I've spent the past sort of 15 years there, but prior to that, I worked in risk management across the defense sector, so the intelligence and defense area. And my definition is very similar, although mine is, how do you maintain and recover operations in the midst of uncertainty and change? And when faced with the unknown, what is the true impact of our inability to operate? And I believe that actually operational resilience applies to all organizations. Financial services have had it applied to them because of regulatory oversight, but all businesses have processes, they have business resiliency and they have operational resiliency, so therefore it applies to everyone.
Excellent, thank you. Kavitha, let me bring you in here, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kavita Venkata. I'm a partner at the ACA Group. The ACA Group, in case you're not familiar, is a GRC advisory services firm, and to the financial services industry. We provide consulting, managed services, and technology solutions in 4 key areas: regulatory compliance, performance verification, cybersecurity and risk, and most recently in ESG. And my role at ACA is I head up the cybersecurity, technology risk, and privacy division. And to garnish what everyone else said about operational resilience, the thing I would say is it's about the ability to absorb shocks to your operation, which is caused either by something within your context or something in your ecosystem. So keeping that view of the extended ecosystem is pretty important when we're thinking about resilience and how we bounce back and how we learn from it.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And just before I bring in our experts to start our conversation, let's run an audience poll that asks, to what extent has coronavirus pandemic increased pressure on operational resilience? So I hope you can see that poll to the right of your video. Have a think about it, and please feel free to fill in any answers you like while I come back to Kavita to hear her views on how the pandemic has put pressure on operational resilience.
Gosh, what a question to start it with, right? In a way, I would say that the pandemic has put a lot of pressure on resilience of every kind, be it personal, professional, organizational, and in some ways it has exposed how all the things we took for granted and how brittle things have been. But specifically, if we think about the financial services industry, I would say there are 3 factors that have been there, but whose impact or whose effect on operational resilience or lack thereof has intensified during the pandemic. The first one is just the continuing digitization or digitalization, whichever is your favorite word, of business workflows and business processes. Companies have only continued accelerating their pace of digital transformation in these times. Some would say that it just forced their hand. The second factor I would say is just the interconnectedness and the continued reliance on third parties, right? And that increases not just risk of something going wrong with you, but something going wrong because through someone who's connected to you and how that affects the overall system. And the third is just the number of cybersecurity attacks that have happened. I was reading this report recently. I think it was released by VMware. Just between February and April of 2020, just as everybody was going into a lockdown of some kind, the number of cyber attacks that financial firms reported went up by 238%. So like cyber criminals are a very enterprising bunch. They are very good at taking advantage of any kind of chaos out there, and the pandemic provided sort of the perfect backdrop for them to take advantage of. So I would say those are the things which are not new, but the impact and intensity have intensified and put pressure on resilience during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Johan, what would you add or say there in terms of the increased pressure?
Well, the short answer is in every way, right? And personally, I remember I was at the time the COVID hit. I was responsible for enterprise-wide crisis management at our firm, and I just stepped off the flight from San Francisco and the RSA conference and walked straight into a war room and was stuck there for about 6 months. And I think we set up a contingency baseline in 3 phases with sort of resolve the situation now, sort of reinforce resilience, and then sort of start thinking about what the next sort of steps would be. And on the resilience topics, what we focused on there was sort of, okay, so what are the key risks? What scenario planning do we need to do? What stress tests do we need to do? And how does that affect leadership, organization, cost structures, capital, liquidity, everything? So it was a big job. And of course, from a technical point of view, it all became a lot about access and remote access and all the things, all the little things we ran into during sort of increasing our remote access footprint, including the cyber stuff that Kavitha had just brought up.
Okay, well, we'll certainly come back to working from home and all that sort of thing. But meantime, can we see the poll result, please? Okay, I don't think we need to comment much on that, do you? I think that is probably much as we would expect it. I'm surprised significantly isn't perhaps a little larger percentage wise, but yep, it's been a big pressure. It's been difficult for everybody, as Kavitha and Johan have said. So let's move on and bring you in here, Scott. What weak spots have emerged in resilience during these sort of exceptional times?
Yeah, so I'm going to go for some slightly different ones. The obvious one that I think a lot of people have, they talk about it in jest, but I don't think we're able to measure the true impact of it at this point, certainly not from an operational risk perspective, and whether or not we'll have to look at anthropological or psychology as a new domain of risk spins up. But digital fatigue, resulting in, I think it's going to, mistakes, shortcuts. Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park once said, "Life finds a way," and your first line are no different. In fact, they're the perfect example of life finding a way, whether it's the fact that they want to try and do something a little bit different, innovate, collaborate. And I think a combination of fatigue can cause us bigger issues. And I think that there will be downstream effects of that. And I believe within operational risk in particular, in fact, in cyber risk as well, operational and enterprise risk, there will be a new area, a new region of domain, and controls and mitigating measures will come off of the back of this that take into account the not so measurable aspects of people risk, which will be interesting for the mathematicians out there. Another one is the inward focus. I think everyone looks very much inwards because we wanted to ensure our own survival. And that mean we took our eye off the competition. So I think a weak spot generally for a lot of people was new channels to market being implemented by competitors and suppliers. There were those that were smaller, agile, and had the ability to deliver, and they maintained that. And there are people taking advantage of that. So there is a much bigger strategic weak spot that's come off the back of this. And then last, and that can have an impact, believe it or not, from a resilience standpoint in the long term. And then the last piece is the rear view mirror qualitative controls. They don't stand up over time. They weren't, qualitative controls don't predict the situation that we're in. They're fantastic, obviously, serving the function they are. But more tracking, observing, predicting, analyzing, that will be the way forward.
Okay. Johan, where did you find the weaknesses as you were in your bunker?
Wow, yeah, well said by Scott. If I'm going to underline something that you just said, Scott, it would be the sustainability part. We very quickly, we were already actually investigating how to become more sort of sustainable in how we work with resilience, and crisis management is one of those areas. So what happens when an organization is put under pressure for a very long time? You see key personnel starting to wobble a bit. You see all kinds of legacy issues that become augmented or amplified by the just drawn out sort of crisis situation. So I think that is a new, for us, that was a new way, sort of new type of vulnerability, if you would. This meeting and standing up to sort of the sustainability concerns around, prolonged crisis activities.
Okay, gosh, these are very big things with a lot of little things tied up, obviously. So Fleur, coming to you, please tell us a little bit about the additional challenges raised by work from home.
I think that the signposting that has already been laid out is very helpful. So people fatigue, for example, I think resonates. And I want to speak more on the technical side around the work from home in terms of some of the risks that we're used to looking at mitigating from a more office-based environment. And that would be around concentration risk, thinking about where our offices are, what's around us, how far away our data centers are, that we might now need to start thinking about how we apply that to the people in our workforce. Suddenly you find people who are co-located, maybe with the same internet service provider, not being well embed as good in some places in the world as in others, and environments where it isn't as robust as you might expect. For example, I think we've all heard for many years how New York suffers quite routinely from power outages. And so how do we meet the challenges for those people in key roles and helping support them to perhaps have uninterruptible power supplies, protected internet access and so forth, to ensure that their function can continue, or at least to the extent that they can pass the book, hand off, and get those things done that we would ordinarily be looking at trying to do from an office-based environment. So I think that it opens up some new vulnerabilities as well in terms of security considerations, and also going back again to Scott's point around people fatigue. What exposures could we start to see from people working in isolation, and perhaps thinking about employee sentiment and looking at how we can track that and utilize it as a new measure to keep ahead of potential issues of that nature.
Scott, you've mentioned some of those things, and Fleur has added some more. What would you say here in terms of working from home particularly?
Well, I wasn't going to mention network quality or availability of the internet, but I think we have the perfect example of the new normal, right, of working from home. One of the additional challenges is obviously the fact that network providers and internet providers are under a heavy load. Therefore, the capability to have this kind of conversation can sometimes be difficult. It could cut out for an unknown reason, and it would be very difficult and awkward. However, the ones that I would like to talk about are slightly different again. So I'm going to go for something a bit weird here, but lack of control over the spread of misinformation, internal misinformation in particular. One of the problems that you have is the minute that we have people working from home and we don't have those traditional office environments, is that we, unfortunately, everyone is completely detached. And it means that communication can get, if it doesn't come clearly at a tone from the top or from certain line managers, it can cause real issues. And misinformation can then start to result in other things, in people becoming disenfranchised, or almost wanting to then perform some kind of malicious act. So in fact, it starts a snowball effect. Now it's a bit extreme, but I had a specific customer that went through this situation where information got out of hand. And then the second one, and then I'll be done on this bit, is shadow IT, falling outside of accepted parties and tolerances. It's a necessary evil that businesses should have and should allow to innovate. But under the pandemic, corporate credit cards, sign off of 10,000 euros or dollars or whatever, and off they go with a frictionless purchase. As long as businesses continue to operate, I feel like that is a continued piece. We're not getting full visibility on what people are buying and what kind of data they're putting in it.
Okay, I have a question from our audience, and I'm going to throw this one back to you, Scott. It says, how can we encourage an understanding of operational resilience with employees working from home and educate them on what to look out for? Obviously, when everybody went home, this was obviously a great concern. You know, what should they be doing? What should they be looking out for? What should they be sharing? How many false positives? All that sort of thing. How can I don't know, management, I assume, encourage a greater understanding and what to look out for?
So management aren't going to like my answer to this, because actually, if you're going to build a culture, is a tone from the top. And unfortunately, in a lot of sectors, overworking, presenteeism, I mean, it's been in the news recently in a lot of specific sectors, that if you're going to have a culture where resiliency is considered, If people are distracted by presenteeism or trying to keep their jobs or working 100-hour weeks, it's impossible for them to consume any information that you want to put into them about security, risk, compliance. I mean, anything is going to be very difficult for them. So building a culture is something that is supported and communicated from the top. Therefore, certain business practices, when we're talking about resiliency in particular, need to change. Otherwise, those practices work directly against building resiliency and educating people on the importance of it. Because if everyone's tired, they're going to make mistakes. And it's not just mistakes. I mean, there's lots of other things that come off the back of it, but that's just a prime example. I hope that answers the question for the person that asked it.
I don't know who it was. They were anonymous, so I hope it did too. Okay, let's run another poll before we talk about the types of operational resilience that present the biggest challenges for financial institutions. So the poll should again be to the right of your video. So please have a think about that. Tick as many boxes as you like while I come to Johan first to say, what types of operational resilience issues are the most challenging and what risks can they cause? I suppose also, what must you prioritize in terms of trying to reduce any risks?
Yeah, wow. I think we don't have an hour, do we?
No.
Let's pick a favorite, because I think the speed of technological innovation is there, approaches to managing change is there, cyber threats is there, climate change is there, fraudsters and cyber criminals is there as well. But one of my favorite topics is actually the a security resilience one, which is how digital transformation in the financial industries is continuing to blur the organization's external boundaries. So how we work with third-party vendors, how we work in open banking initiatives, how we sort of use non-employee talent in new ways, how we share data, all these things. The blurring of the organization's external boundaries is the big challenge for financial institutions. And you can include sort of data flows in that. You can include a lot of different things. But financial institutions today is far from sort of the old banks with four walls and a security guard and a vault in the middle, right? So that is really the challenge.
Okay, Kavitha, what would you add there in terms of the big issues?
Yeah, I would double click on one thing Johan said about third-party risk, right? As the boundaries disappear, there is a much larger risk both to yourself as an organization and to the system as a whole. So, for instance, I'll come at it from two different perspectives, right? So, one is from a technology outage standpoint. One of the services we offer our clients is doing due diligence on their third parties. And when we look at the data and aggregate it, we find that in the last 1 year, right, nearly 50% of our clients actually said that they either had an outage that was caused by a third party or a security breach that had its origin at a third party, right? And at some level, once you take, and even like, how do you define a third party, fourth party, fifth party? How much can you even hope to put a ring fence around what that extended enterprise looks like? And the second perspective I would come at it from is from a cybersecurity standpoint, which is if you look at sort of the most common ways intruders are using to enter financial institution systems, social engineering by targeting your employees is number one, but a close number two is what I would call watering hole attacks or island hopping attacks, where they gain access to one of your third parties and through that get to you, right? So that the blurring of that extended enterprise boundary also puts a pressure on resilience for yourself in a way that is a bit out of your control in doing anything about. And the second thing, I think Scott said it very well, I would say, is the the distributed workforce, or as I would call it, the distracted workforce. Give you an example. So we do this penetration testing, and I asked one of our penetration testers, so how quickly can you gain access to a privileged account at one of the companies that you're testing? And he said, oh, 4 hours. I said, what? Tell me what is the easiest way you do it. And he said, oh, all our clients, many clients have multi-factor authentication, right? But people are so distracted that when your multi-factor says, you need access, approve, deny, right? They just click on it without thinking because they are putting the dog out or helping set up their kids' Zoom homework. And there you go, boom, somebody has entered. So I would say those would be the two that I would highlight in terms of challenges, both near term and in the long term, that organizations have to get a handle around.
Okay, that's great. Let's see the results of the poll, which those things were not on the poll. So the third party and supplier risk is way up there. Business continuity, I guess that's a continuous issue. Johan, any comments on those results?
No, I think that's we have a very wise audience. I think I think that this is proof of that, absolutely, and we're seeing more or less the same thing. And whether sort of cyber attacks is your biggest issue, or third party in general, or third party cyber attacks, I mean, yeah, it's up to each and every one, but very, very recognizable themes.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on and come back to you, Fleur, and tell us a little bit about how financial institutions plan to improve their operational resilience from a practical point of view, while sustaining business agility. And you might like to talk us through the contents of this slide.
Thank you. Okay, so I think contextualizing this new language that we have around operational resilience, where the UK regulators are concerned in particular, and that is this new distinction called an impact, intolerable harm, and having impact tolerances for services. So not only are we bringing a new lens to how we look at our firms to prioritize the critical business services, but there's also this new language, this new concept of an impact tolerance. So along with the key elements of defining what your critical business services are, mapping them, mapping the dependencies to third parties and so forth, as well as cyber and technology and people. What's helpful around impact tolerances is to differentiate it from those things that we're used to doing. So the stadium analogy is to look at what's familiar to us and then what's new. So first off, let's start on the playing field. And we could call this risk management, the risk appetite work that we do to understand how we engage in the game. And if we think about the playing field, that's everybody inside the organization, everybody that we are working with, consumers and customers, and our third parties, and everybody who's engaged in the game. And the deal is everybody has signed up to play and to play with the ball. And to a certain degree, we accept disruption will happen, and we would, at this level, think of that as the potential to inconvenience people by not having something available. But if the ball were to go into the stands, then we've got an audience of people who've paid for a ticket. So there is a risk of there being some sort of a harm. It's not as likely as being inconvenient, so it'll happen less often, but there is a risk there. But like a risk appetite, understanding that potential for harm, and we can ring fence this around business impact analyses or recovery time objectives. This is something that we're used to looking at internally. What's our tolerance as a firm, mapping with our strategic objectives? What are we willing to accept and inflict? Now, when intolerable harm, this impact tolerance concept is concerned, it's that the ball would go out of play. So everybody in the stadium, and the firm's demise, if you like, no longer is participating. So that's an intolerable harm to them, but also there's that chance of systemic impact that comes with this. So taking that helicopter view, assessing, understanding, analyzing what is the impact tolerance for the lack of provision of this particular critical business service, and when does that go outside? Where's the boundary line of what our firm is doing? Now, if that can get recovered, it gets back in the stadium and on you play. If it doesn't in financial services, then you're into the RRP, the recovery and resolution, so the winding down of the firm, and so we think of that as irrecoverable. So having a good grasp and consistent understanding of these concepts, defining what's internal, what makes this new measure different to what we're used to doing. And it's difficult from the extent that to find the impact tolerance thresholds, the absolute outer boundary, is a new conversation that visits into conversations that we're used to having around business continuity, disaster recovery, because we need to find the ultimate boundary line on that. And that it visits in the main work of operational resilience, I think, is about keeping fit and making sure that we're measuring the right things and looking for those indicators, those predictive indicators. And so that happens long before we might get into an incident. So we utilize that crisis management understanding to find a boundary line and analysis, but then our main work that's much further back from that activity.
Thank you very much, Fleur. And coming to you, Johan, how do you think people and your own bank are planning to improve operational resilience from a sort of practical standpoint while still having business agility? Because obviously you can pin everybody down, but then you're not going to be doing very much.
Yeah, I think you need to really go back to sort of what is your operating model and what is the culture sort of your institution and your enterprise. And really understand how that applies to who takes what responsibility, what is the sort of rules of engagement when it comes to accountability for different parts of your development and your launch process, etc. So it comes back to these basic things around change and development and how that is really sort of operating in your enterprise. And then I like to sprinkle, so on top of that, a bit of understanding around, okay, what is now maybe described best as an assume breach or assume incident kind of policy, so that you really sort of apply a test and exercise with tangible examples onto that operating model and really sort of subject those who are have different types of accountabilities to that types of test and exercise. That is the direction we're trying to move in. Are we there yet? Are we really good at it? Absolutely not. I think it's very, very difficult, but it fits well with an agile operating model to have a test and exercise approach and to ask these different and difficult questions around sort of what if you're breached? What if you have an incident? So that's sort of our direction.
Okay, that's great. Kavitha, coming over to you, we've talked about the I shouldn't say the importance, but the sort of the size of these breaches and so on, how big they can be, the damage they can do, the things that have come up from work from home scenarios. How can financial institutions begin to balance the cost and resilience such that they're not pinning everybody down, which of course they don't want to do, but things are pretty safe, but they're agile and they're reasonably affordable?
Whenever I talk to clients about this topic, right, the one thing I always tell them is to don't think about operational resilience as a project or as a one-time effort. It is going back to what Johan said, it's about, we cannot perfectly predict the future, right? None of us, I think, 2 years ago would have said, hey, we would be doing this over Zoom or on a virtual platform. It's really about breaking down your operations into parts and pieces and what I would call micro capabilities. So the first thing I think from balancing cost and resilience, I would say is first thing is really focus, right? So what truly matters? What can we really live without and what can we not live without? And knowing that for different parts of the business. And then saying, what are the capabilities that underlie those things that are truly, truly important? And then the other thing I would say is organizations have this tendency to, whether it is business continuity planning, disaster recovery, operational resilience, to make this big binder of plans, right? Which by themselves are gathering dust somewhere. And if you can't even get into the office, you cannot even take it off the dusty shelf to look at when the crisis actually hits. So it's really about saying, how do I know what really matters? What are the capabilities that underlie them? And can I measure and test for those capabilities? So, for instance, if being able to communicate quickly to your entire employee base is a capability, can you do a quick test, right? Which will reveal that, oh, we don't have emergency information for half our staff. Or if we find out that we could even test it in small ways, like we could say, okay, what happens if this entire division decides to work from home or not come into work on a particular day? What breaks? Those are smaller things we can test instead of having to do these big things. And I think having that kind of breakdown and prioritization at that level is something that would help organizations really balance how they think about the cost of building and maintaining an operational resilience plan that is pragmatic and actually will work when something actually hits.
Thank you, Fleur. This is probably something you've actually had to do at some point. So tell us how you would make this balance between the amount of resilience you have and the cost of it.
Yes, this is very familiar territory. And I think there's a huge opportunity for firms in the formalization of operational resilience that many practitioners in business continuity or business resilience have been driving for many years. And that's the prioritization of the recovery of what's critical. Now, we're looking at it through a different lens at the moment, through the product lens, rather than as we would normally run our operating model more functionally and as we are structured. But this does afford us a tremendous opportunity. By understanding what's critical and when it's critical, you can then do the gap analysis on it failing at the worst possible time and the minimal things required to recover it to mitigate that disruption. And one of the experiences I've had over the years, particularly in investment banking, is he who shouts loudest gets the most resilient infrastructure. And quite often that will be investment banking divisions. Nothing can disrupt what they're doing. And so they end up paying for everything and they've got deep pockets and usually that goes fine. But a huge opportunity for businesses through this analysis of understanding what's critical and when it's critical means that anybody who will benefit from a more resilient recovery time for a specific bit of infrastructure gets to pay for it. And you can cross-charge in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get everybody. So Treasury typically get to piggyback along with some very highly resilient infrastructure because somebody else just paid for it. So you can organize the way that things are paid for as a result of this analysis.
That's great. Thank you. That's very interesting indeed. Let's take a final audience poll, this time about the readiness for FCA regulation on operational resilience. So why don't you have a think about that? Let me come back to you, Fleur, if I may, and ask, how can firms make sure they're on the right side of regulatory requirements like the senior management certificate regime and upcoming FCA rules for greater operational resilience? And I don't think this is just a case of work from home. This is just something they've been looking at for some time.
Yes, and I think this is part of the journey that UK regulators in particular have been on since the financial crisis in the late 2000s. And with this new lens of looking through products and services, because it is divergent to how firms often will structure themselves, that can present quite a few challenges around the ownership of who's going to own the delivery of this product end to end, because it cuts across a lot of internal shared services and can present some challenges in a governance structure in that way, particularly, for an organization like ourselves, where we're offering the same product globally, and having local regulatory responses required in slightly different levels, then establishing what's right for the organization and standardizing that in a way that will meet regulation by default. So you're not going to have to worry about the local nuances, and you can really mitigate. And I guess I'm speaking about this from a global firm's perspective, but that can really seriously help an organization to not have to chase its tail on meeting a million different regulations by doing the right thing, working out what's right for us as an organization. And I think dialing back in the conversation quite a way, we were talking about the culture of an organization, in particular, setting that right tone, and that by establishing that and understanding those frameworks and methodologies that mean that standardized analysis, common understandings and approaches, then laying in a governance structure over the top of that, that means that you can get the ownership end to end. And that can be through the SMF structures or other governance that will meet that requirement at the same time. What I'd say. So it's not easy. It does present challenges, but I do think there is a way through it, and trying to aim at it is probably going to be harder than aiming slightly higher and hitting it all by default.
Okay, that's interesting. Kavitha, what would you like to add here? And I think you have a slide here that you can talk us through some of the elements that could be useful.
So when we work with clients on building out their operational resilience program, so these are some of the building blocks we look for, right? Which is based on a variety of, if we look across different regulators, so the FCA, the ECB, the SEC, and FINRA in the US, this kind of gives you a common set of building blocks that an operational resilience program typically should have. But like Fleur said, what I think is critical is that top piece, that is the program governance. Because what we typically find is that most organizations have independent or individual building blocks in place. But that is usually not a unified framework to look at all of these together through the lens of operational resilience. So it might be the case of each system might work, but together it might not serve its intended purpose of delivering resilience. Therefore, what we suggest is at the building block level, make sure that you have a clear owner, make sure that each of these blocks have clear outcomes and improvement targets to aim for, right? But at the end of the day, they are all talking to and exchanging information at the governance level. And what is important, it is not governance in the sense that, okay, you all get together into a meeting and let's talk about what's going on, but it is really governance in terms of thinking about the horizontal business process that cuts across each of these, that really calls each of these as sort of a service call, right? To say, okay, I need to get goods to a certain place. I need to deliver a check to a customer. I need to make a payment happen. And that needs to pull things from all these different areas. And when that breaks, all these different areas have to come into play in slightly different ways to make that happen. So making sure that the governance is horizontal and cross-cutting, and it is set at the right altitude. I think Fleur said that as well, so that we are not missing the forest for the trees.
Okay, that's great. Let's have a look at the poll results and see how people are doing with their FCA preparations, if we may. Thank you. That's great. Wow, That's
Wow.
pretty impressive. Yeah. Do you think so, Kavitha? That's
A confident crowd.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
very
good luck.
impressive.
Yeah, that is good. Okay. Don't know if the FCA is watching, but perhaps they should be. Okay, fine. Scott, coming back to you. What sort of technologies, tools and services can help financial institutions improve their operational resilience? We've talked about a huge variety from, actual things to smaller things to people and all these sorts of things. What kind of technologies, things can help here? Obviously, culture comes first, but below that, what's helpful?
Yeah, so to be really clear though, technology isn't a magic wand. It's coming from software land. It can often be seen or marketed as such, and it doesn't replace good process and planning and plans, not just a plan. However, going forward with operational resilience, that's the thing, right? We're looking into the future because it's not about what's happened yesterday, although yesterday informs us, educates us, allows us to learn root cause analysis. Today allows us to plan, but actually the most exciting thing, which I consider to be exciting about resilience, is actually looking forward. And using some form of predictive or informative capability, whether that's actually external services, so from a software perspective or services, there are systems out there that can provide you with intelligence or information, kind of like a news feed from that perspective that can be consumed. If you need a repository of some description that everyone can operate and collaborate in, that isn't just second line friendly, because as much as we all love this stuff, we often forget the line of business that has to use it. They use it infrequently. They're rubbish at it. And I'm not being derogatory, but they are. They're terrible with GRC tools in general because they were never built for them. And so it's really about making sure you've got a repository. It's collaborative. It's first line friendly above all else. You're going to push, responsibilities out, and then that it's fed with data that's meaningful to your business and it's contextual. And then lastly, all of this data that lives within it, how do I give that as context to report up? Because I tell you what, impact and likelihood is not going to cut the mustard when you're reporting to the board. They work in a language of the business. How is it going to affect widgets we're going to deliver, ARR we're going to make, quarterly projects, whatever it may be. So value-based reporting is critical. That's the high level, I think. But yeah, from a technology standpoint, I would start with repository, good system, great reporting, easy to consume data from external sources, and above all else, first line friendly.
Okay, Kavitha, what would you like to add there?
I think Scott covered most of it. The one thing I would add is I think the process of building a more resilient organization is really about the painstaking work of coordinating 1,000 different small tasks across 100 groups, right? And again, none of this can be done sort of top down. And any system anyone uses, how they need to configure it is where it can either become a great success or a grand failure. So making sure that whichever platform it is that you're using can actually serve as a repository, can help coordinate and drive collaboration across disparate groups who might otherwise never ever work together. And then saying, are there some of these tasks that are best done by someone else, right? And what are some targeted areas for outsourcing that we should look at? That's what I would add. So essentially, the system can help us both from planning for the future and making sure that the activities we are doing, small things don't fall through the cracks.
Okay. Scott, can I come back to you? And we have an audience question. It's something you raised earlier and also Johan, I think. And it says, to what extent should we minimize working with third parties to reduce threats to operational resilience? That's a very broad question, isn't
it? Look, you can't. You just can't. That is an impossible task unless within your organization you have the capability to deliver, generate your own power, do your own. I mean, yeah, it's one of those sort of situations where, in fact, actually you're going to have to assume the fact that the reliance is going to increase rather than decrease. It's like saying we'd like to decrease our attack surface. when we're in the digital age, and everything lives in containers that other people manage and protect on our behalf. Look, the reality is you can pick who you work with, and more importantly, you can put a set of criterion that improves the quality of that relationship. But I wouldn't go at it from a risk perspective. I would go at it from a trust standpoint and almost flip it on its head. It's third-party trust. It's about having a conversation at certain points, as well as getting all of that data. But yeah, I'll let Johan probably flesh this out a little bit more. But yeah, that won't help.
No, you're right, and I could just add one thing, and that is, you're not allowed to outsource to a third party stuff that you don't understand. So you have to have the purchaser competence in-house. You have to have the ability to know what you're requiring and what you're requesting, and how you want it done and how you want it cooked and baked within that third party. So you're not allowed to outsource anything that you don't understand.
Okay, that's great. Let me stay with you, Johan. And we've talked about making it all better. Tell us a little bit about, if you can, a crisis that you've experienced and what's the best way out.
Yeah, okay. I think it's fundamentals, right? In any crisis, I've been through different types. I've been through reputational crisis. I've been through pandemics now. I've been through IT crisis. It's like major sort of availability or blackout sort of situations that happen to any firm that are sort of resting on an IT infrastructure. But what is common to all this is that there is a before and a during and an after. Before meaning that you need to work with your plans. You need to work with your risk assessment and understanding about the processes and risks, and have the frameworks in place. Now, when the crisis happens, everything that is a framework is just a framework, and it's out the door immediately, and it's about the people in the room. What you can do is, of course, you can work with automation, different types of trigger mechanisms, so that you are quicker at detecting, alarming, activating different crisis responses. But then it is about the effectiveness of crisis management in a resilience perspective, operational resilience perspective, is sort of how good are you at developing a situational awareness immediately. So that is really sort of what you need to do. You need to assess sort of that pandemic or that IT situation and understand what is this, and create a set of facts. And then it's about setting a clear direction based on those facts. What is important? What are we really protecting here? Is it lives at stake, or is it something else? What is important here? And then you move through the fundamentals of crisis management. You make timely decisions. You integrate communication really well. You liaise with all the different stakeholders that you need, and you run sort of very effective meetings, and you use ICM tools of different kinds to make this more effective. But there is one thing that I always come back to, and that is sustainability and its mandates, right? Because crisis management is about one thing. It's about making very difficult decisions in a short amount of time based on too little information. That is what crisis management is about. So that means that you need to have the right people in the room, and you have to have people who are leading crisis management that has the mandate to make those decisions. Because if you can't make a decision, if you have to escalate, if you have to call your CEO, or if you have to call your business area manager because you're a business area or business unit crisis function to ask if you're allowed to do this or that, then you're not effective. You have to have sort of weaned this out before, and you have to have those mandates in place to be effective. And then it's about again, it's trust and courage among the people who are running the show in a crisis.
Okay, that is not our hard stop for today. We do have one final piece of information, an item that that I'll ask our experts. And on the basis of all we've talked about, let me ask them what guidance they'd give to practitioners working on operational resilience. And Scott, perhaps you could start here.
Okay, I'm going to start with a quote. I apologise, but I always feel it's interesting. I was looking when I was researching this. It's just something that, yeah. Anyway, emergency that is unexpected. Emergency is that is unexpected. Therefore, it's not going to happen the way you are planning. Which was Eisenhower said, and I like that. And there's lots of other ones, Winston Churchill, about you can have plans that not value the planning. But I would say, actually, look, I've got one piece of advice, which is you can have the best processes, people, processes, and technology. When you break it down into component parts, process and technology is easy. It's measurable metrics that are much easier to quantify, and we're more familiar with quantifying it. However, the most critical part to resilience is people, and by nature, they are variable in response to an emergency, as Johan mentioned. And you can't embed a culture with just learning management or policy. Culture is learned, not taught. And interactions are absolutely fundamental. It's synonymous with behavior, and top-down values have to be reflected. So if you're looking at a way of building a culture, it's not an academic exercise to maintain operations when something bad happens. There's some stuff from the top that we need help with.
Okay. Kavitha, what would you say in terms of guidance?
I would say think of operational resilience not in terms of plans and frameworks, but I think of it in terms of 3 C's, right? The first C is capabilities. What are the capabilities that are most critical for us to maintain, to avoid or reduce the impact of or bounce back from a disruption? The second C is communication. A lot of this is, like Johan and Scott have said, is about how people act and behave and how they make decisions with little information. So having the communication infrastructure and tone, right, is super important. And the last bit is culture, because at the end of the day, how much ever we have automated everything, whatever systems we have, it is those people in the room who are making a call, and what decisions they make, what is the North Star they are going to use to make that decision is going to be driven by the values, culture, the examples that have been set and how they have learned it. So I would say, don't forget these things, the capabilities, the communication, and the culture in the throes of building out the operational resilience plan.
Thank you. And Fleur, some final words from you, please.
Okay, I'm going to come at this at a slightly different tack. I want to dial back from crisis management and think about business as usual operational resilience. What's the objective? What are the outputs that your operational resilience team is going to produce? And it's quite simply, let's think about the operational resilience MI. How are you measuring how resilient the services, those dependencies and resources that go into providing that service to your consumers and customers? How resilient is it? How are you creating that MI? What is the output going to look like? And design that way you're not going to miss any attributes that you could be measuring around people, technology, the facilities, and so forth. And also the KRIs and KPIs for that service. 2 more things. Common understanding. Establish your own language economy out there and educate and make people aware. Get that understanding embedded. And then lastly, thinking about those experts you're working with is not necessarily going to be your continuity directors, very people who do this service delivery day in, day out, and they are going to be the ones who can form a qualitative view over any MI that you're able to gather and create that reporting up the governance chain. So think of those subject matter experts as a new community in the organization and start thinking about how you can communicate with them.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience today. And thank you too to OneTrust and ACA for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a very interesting and good conversation. As I mentioned earlier, on your screens, you can see where you can sign up for our RegTech Summit Virtual. You can download the latest regulatory data handbook that we've produced, and you can also download the Financial Markets Operations Response to COVID-19 white paper. We've just put up an additional poll question to gauge interest in live events this year, so do please fill that in. Like most firms, we're wondering about whether, when we'll be back on the front line talking to people, which we really look forward to. Otherwise, that's it for today. So thank you again to Kavitha, Fleur, Scott and Johan, and thank you to all of you who have joined the webinar. Please complete our webinar feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meantime, thanks again and goodbye.